Welcome to Harder Than It Looks, Parking Uncovered, a podcast that illuminates real solutions to common problems within the parking industry. I'm your host, Brian Wolff, CEO of Parker Technology, and in each episode, I'll introduce you to real parking pros that will bring their own tips, tricks, and best practices to manage what we all know is harder than it looks, parking a car. On the show today, I'm joined by parking legends and the hosts of All Things Parking with Dani Crain and John Conway. Dani Crain is currently the Director of Implementation in Parking and Mobility for the Oakview Group and lives in Denver, Colorado with her beloved pup, Axel. I want to hear more about Axel, maybe even see some pictures. She's a small town girl from New Mexico who had big dreams to change the world. Little did she know that she would be doing just that, one parking space at a time. Dani has been in the consulting space for over 10 years. She successfully ran her own business in Denver for 4 years before moving into the wonderful world of parking and mobility. She's been in parking going on 7 years. Her expertise is in parking operations with an emphasis on parking technology. When she's not traveling coast to coast, she's spending her time with a good book and a glass of vino. And John D. Conway is a parking industry veteran and legend with over 29 years of experience in transportation and parking operations. He's a founding member of Parking Revenue Recovery Services, PRS, and contributed significantly to making PRS the industry's leading compliance and data analytics services provider. John serves as Chief Business Development Officer and Executive Vice President at PRS and continues to be the company's visionary as a member of the board of directors. Previously, he served Denver mayors Wellington Webb and John W. Hickenlooper as a commissioner on the Denver Parking Commission and was appointed by both administrations to serve 2 consecutive 3-year terms. Recently, he served on the board of directors for the Cherry Creek North Business Improvement District. John is in possession of a vast parking industry knowledge, and he can't wait to share it with you. Dani and John, welcome to Harder Than It Looks, and cheers.
Cheers, Brian.
Cheers.
Thanks for having us on.
Thanks for what an introduction. Thank you. You're too kind.
Yeah. I read through those introductions and those bios, and I was like, oh my goodness, there is so much good information to get at through that. So the first thing I want to know is, what kind of dog is Axel?
Oh, Axel. He always steals the show and I love it. Axel is a Jack Russell Beagle mix.
Oh my.
And he has the appetite of a Beagle and a Jack Russell and the energy of Jack Russell, right? Like Beagles can be a little less energetic. I rescued him 13 years ago. He just turned 14 a few weeks ago and he still has his puppy energy, but I rescued him. He's a pound puppy. I rescued him from the main streets of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Yeah, so I've had him for 4 years. He just turned 14.
He's getting old.
I call him my little silver fox. He's definitely getting up there, but
That's fantastic. I can only think of one thing when I think of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and you know what I'm going to say, right?
yeah, Breaking Bad. I love my home state, and I'm not from Albuquerque. So I will disclaimer, I didn't grow up in Albuquerque. I went to college in Albuquerque. I went to UNM, but I grew up in Gallup, which is 130 miles west of Albuquerque. So I grew up in a really small town, which I've said this before on a few of our shows. But when I tell people I'm from New Mexico, they're like, Breaking Bad. And I'm like, I think I've watched like 1 or 2 episodes. And so I don't know this. I obviously know what it's about, but I don't know anything further than what like the core, like what it's actually about. And so I can't relate to anyone who tries to talk to me about it. I've just never seen it. So.
Wasn't your car on blocks or something?
No, I was always afraid of driving my car downtown and leaving it in an actual parking garage because it's a real thing. Like people would leave their car downtown and go the next morning and find their cars on parking blocks because they're either be stripped or their wheels were gone.
Yeah.
But I know it's a great city. Albuquerque is great. It just has its little issues as most.
Yeah. And it's famous for sure.
Yeah.
So John, how old is PRS?
It's 23rd year this year.
Okay. All right. And you've been at it for 23 years. That's incredible. Good for you. Congratulations.
Yeah, I've been at it for off and on through. There was a period of time where I was silent and doing other things. and my business partner and his wife ran the show for many years.
That's great. Okay, so if you've listened to my podcast, one of the things I like to do, the standard question is nobody wakes up or nobody goes to college thinking they're going to get into parking. So everybody has a story about getting into parking. Now, the way I want to get at it is I'm going to ask each of you to go back as far as you want to go back and take us through place to place and how you got from one place to the next, because ultimately you'll end up where you are today, which will probably tell us how you got into parking. I don't care who goes first. Go back as far as you want and tell us your story.
Go first.
You want me to go first? Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say, mine's a little shorter since I've been in the industry a little less time.
That's a zing at my age there.
No, I think that there are just details that you can tell about your story that you can't leave out. I never thought, no one thinks that they're going to come into parking, but
Nope.
moving to Denver from New Mexico right out of college, I got a job in radio. So I started a career in radio. And when I say that, I was marketing and promotions. I did some on-air voiceover commercials, but was never like an on-air talent. So I loved what I did. I loved the radio industry. It was really great to me. But at one point, I think after 5-ish years in radio, I was ready to move on. And one of my good friends at the time, she's a recruiter. And I was telling her like, hey, if you hear of anything, please let me know. I think I'm ready to move on. I'm not, there's no urgency, but I'm just ready. She goes, this is really funny. I just met this woman recently. We recently connected and she's looking for a marketing manager, but she works for a parking company. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And I was like, look, like I know nothing. I didn't even know what that meant at the time. I was just like, yes, I'm interested, instantly interested. And so we went bowling one night and I met my former boss. And coming out of it, I was like, wow, it just sounds like she made it sound like she had been in the industry for a really long time already at that point. And I went in and I was like, absolutely, like I'm in. Whatever I need to do, so the owner flew out of the company flew out to interview me. I met with two of the owners and then it was my former boss. And we had so much fun. And I was like, if this is parking, if this is the industry, and I just met these people and I think that they're wonderful, why would I not want to do this?
Yeah.
So I took a leap of faith and I quit my radio career and I entered the world of parking and I learned parking from the ground up. I was hired as a marketing manager. I had a marketing manager title, but I learned parking from the ground up. I learned how to change gates, how to change paper, order access cards. Man, I've worked on TIBA equipment. I've worked on a mono data park. Like I've worked with all these different types of equipment. And so I really did learn the industry from the ground up. And I'm really thankful for that. I can fix a roll gate if need be. And
Nice.
I don't know about today. My skills are a little rusty, but so I was in operations for a really long time here in Denver, oversaw a lot of the Colorado market for the operator that I worked for. And during my time in operations, I worked with incredible parking solutions and technologies. And one of my former bosses came to me and said, hey, Dani, like I have this position open in the Denver market. And I just want to know if you're interested. I'm like, I'm really happy where I'm at, but of course, like I want to hear more. And so I decided to make the switch from operations to technology. And so I left operations and I went over to Arrive, where I thank David Weber for giving me the opportunity to make that switch. And it was one of the best decisions I've made, right? I loved operations, but the technology side of things is one of the big reasons why I really got into parking, because I really I knew that this was a growing industry and on the technology side. And I wanted that experience. I wanted to gain that experience. So then I went to Arrive, where then I met my now boss, Joe Lang. He was the director for customer success for Flash, which Arrive was acquired by Flash. And I was at Arrive for a few years, and then a lot of changes were happening. Joe left, and then one day approached me and said, hey, I want you to come run the parking vertical at Oakview Group with me. And it was honestly a dream come true. So that is where I am today. 2 years in at Oakview Group, thanks to Joe Lang and everyone along, my journey, David Weber and my former boss, Jessica Heinmarch, which I couldn't be more thankful. I'm very grateful for my start, because without that, I wouldn't be where I'm at today.
Yeah. What a great story. You said a couple of really important things. First of all, you got a great radio voice. I definitely hear it. All the voiceovers, you probably were a hit.
Yeah.
And as far as getting into parking, my experience has been parking people are the nicest people and some of the most fun people I've ever met for sure. So you hit the nail on the head there too. And then I'm always listening for stories about people being dragged by their boss somewhere else. So for me, that's usually that certainly is a green flag when I'm trying to hire somebody, when I hear stories about people being dragged from one place to the next, because I can almost use that person as the proxy for that person did a great job and I want them over here. That's how many of the leaders at Parker got here. And so that's usually a stamp of approval. Hats off to you for that too, for being dragged along.
Oh, I appreciate that. I do want to emphasize, I'm lucky that I came into the industry under women, like a woman leadership and strong women leader. She was such a strong leader in the industry, and she was a woman, and she's still very well respected in the industry. And I think that really set the tone for the rest of my career. And so I'm very thankful for that. I think that's unique in its own sense. And
for sure.
Very grateful.
Yeah, we're going to get into that in a little bit. That's one of the questions for sure. All right, John, it's your turn to go back as far as you want and tell us John D. Conway's story.
I'll try to be quick. I started in 1994. I went to college. I'm from New York originally, upstate, but I went to college out here at Colorado State, and then went in the military after college. And I went to upstate New York, back my hometown, got onto the sheriff's department. And let's just say there was some incidences at Colorado State, which I had a secret clearance in the government. What it really boiled down to, I think I was blackballed. I got on to the sheriff's department. I was due to start. I was going to the range, and I had a fireman's banquet because I was a volunteer fireman forever since I was 18. And one of the school office ladies, her husband had been in the sheriff's department for 30 plus years. I hadn't seen her in a long time since I graduated high school. So she goes, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to be on the sheriff's department." And then like literally a couple days later, I get a call about a bounce check and something else while I was at CSU. So I was a college kid. Anyway, so I left upstate New York, came back out to Colorado, now recently married at the time, and answered this obscure ad, parking manager, for a company called Amco System Parking, which is now ABM, and got this ad and responded to it, went through a couple of interviews and got the job as a manager trainee. And my career took off from there, and trying to explain to people at the time what I did was comical. I see a lot of back in the day, the ABM, I thought, had a great training program. You basically did every job in that first year. So the first quarter, you'd be in maintenance, sinking poles. Second quarter, you're valeting cars. Third quarter, you're valet and assist on lots where people are parking 4 deep. And during that time, I would see fraternity brothers walking to their jobs in their suits, and I'm out on a parking lot in a suit. They're just laughing at me. "What are you doing, Conway?" "Oh, I'm parking cars." So, but then, if you go back a little bit, so my first real big win at ABM was the equity office portfolio in Denver. We took from standard parking at the time. It was probably 6 or 7 buildings. And so my dad had shared with me before we did the presentation leading up to it, a photo of me when I was 14 years old with my tube socks pulled up, and in the back it says parking attendant. So my job at Giuseppe's restaurant was to make sure that everybody parking in Giuseppe's actually went to Giuseppe's. And if they didn't, then I called the tow truck. So that's actually, during my presentation, we worked that in. It was like, yeah, I'm 12 years in parking, but really I started 22 years ago. So
nice.
It was pretty funny. So again, that's how I got into it, and no regrets for sure. The parking industry has been good to me. You said I've met a lot of great people, a lot of smart people, and I've used your term. I have to, full disclosure, parking people are gritty. And I've used that ever since we had you on the podcast, because I love that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, parking people are gritty. Which branch of the military did you serve in?
A U.S. Coast Guard.
Okay.
So I was on a lead-it team. So we actually did boardings. There were seven men to the team or women. My particular team was all male, but we did boardings off of Navy ships down in the Caribbean. So it was really, the program started from George Bush and Ronald Reagan trying to get, in the drug war back then, trying to get the Navy involved in justifying and keeping Navy hulls afloat and busy. And so it was a good exercise, and they were pretty active down in the Caribbean. So I did most of my work with riding Navy ships.
Okay. So you're boarding like cigarette boats that you suspect are trafficking drugs?
No, we did 400 feet or more. So we would board large merchant ships.
Okay.
And nothing glory about it back then. It was like hours worth of what I would call manual labor. We had to account for 90% of that ship. So we had bore scopes, we'd drill holes where we couldn't account, and they would take hours, sometimes 4 to 5 hours boarding those large ships.
Yeah.
So, and honestly, the scariest part for me was getting on and off. I'm afraid of heights. So having to climb a Jacob ladder 10 stories in the air up a merchant ship while you're trying to get on and off in 16-foot seas, that was the scariest part for me.
Yeah, I didn't know that about you. We learn something new about each other every time we record. So
see, that is my point. That's exactly why I take people back and ask them to tell their histories, because we learn things about people that we didn't know. So that is pretty funny.
Yeah. The only time we ever got into an actual something that you would consider exciting was I actually rode a British HMS Cumberland for 2 weeks, which was British, had a big presence in the Belize. And so they always had a frigate that would support their Marines in Belize, which most people don't know. So they wanted to participate in the drug war down there. So we rode their ship for 2 weeks, and we actually chased a low profile, what I would call a makeshift kind of submarine. So they would have a low profile on the water. So what in their minds, they would go undetected from radar.
Yeah.
And then they had these big cargo hold underneath the water filled with the drugs. And so we followed this thing for a couple of days. The helicopters were following it. And so the British captain that we were on was a nut. They don't play by the same rules as we do. So we used to do flight observations. So we would go out and a couple 100 miles away from the ship, we'd take photographs of the hull number, and then we'd come back, run it through Epic, and decide whether we're going to board that ship. And and every time you land on the deck of a ship, America, and if it's an American ship, they have a nice right of approach. It's all safety. So I rode a British Lynx and swooped right over the back of the deck and then slams down on the ship. It was insane. But anyways, the British helicopter took over, and their guys, at the order of the captain, threw these 90-pound sonar buoys at Coxswain and broke the coxswain as the boat driver.
Yeah.
Broke the guy's leg, like literally in half.
Oh my goodness.
So they slowed down, obviously. Everybody caught up, but like days later, so they were throwing like 70-pound bales of marijuana. It was a ridiculous amount of marijuana, but days later, the American admiral that was in charge is fishing for information throughout everybody involved. Whose helicopter was that? How the Americans do it, for sure. But it was effective because everybody caught up with the boat and was able to seize that. So
nice. Oh, that's great. Oh, good stories. Yeah. Excellent stories. Okay, so let's turn our attention now to all things parking with Dani and John. Tell me the inspiration for doing a podcast. Where did it come from? Who came up with the loony idea to start a podcast?
So I think it's funny because I think John and I might have different answers because we remember how this unfolded differently.
Yeah.
But so 2 years ago, two years ago, right? Because it was, a year ago at the anniversary was a PRS Expo a year ago because we just hit the second. Yeah. So a year ago.
Yeah. We're in our second year.
Yeah.
So.
I had just started with OVG, and I was invited to this incredible PRS Expo. I was really excited. And John and I have worked together like previously, but not when I was at Flash, but we've always known each other. And I think we ended up catching up and we had a few drinks after the expo and we were just chatting and bantering back and forth. And then we went to happy hour after, and someone at the table, and I don't remember who it was.
Steve Resnick.
They're like, man, you guys should have a podcast. You guys are funny and your banter back and forth. And John and I looked at each other and we were like, oh, that would be fun. But we didn't really talk about it then. And then the next day, one of us called each other. I think John might have called me and he was like, do you want to do this? And I was like, I think we should absolutely have a podcast. And it was a little bit scary at the time because I was like, oh man, like I just started my new job. I'm at like a high profile venue company and I'm not really sure. I'm like, John, you're so far in your career and so that's how I remember it. But I'm interested to hear your side of the story.
Yeah, it wasn't just Dani and I sitting down. There was probably 10 people,
Right?
Industry icons. So Steve Resnick was there. I think Charlie DeBow was there. There was a bunch of people. And so everybody was winding down from the eat. We had a dinner after the expo and everybody was well on their way with several cocktails. And somehow it just came up because I think Dani and I were bantering back and forth about something. And somebody said, you guys should have a podcast. And then it just went from there. And everybody was throwing out ideas and what if you did this? What if you did that? I think the industry had a podcast at the time, which I viewed at the time. I listened to it after that night and I thought more of a educational, more of a formal, very good part. Isaiah
I love Isaiah.
Yeah.
Good guy.
So do I. And I just thought in talking with Dani, we talked it over. We're like, there's a different niche to fill, right? That we thought maybe we'll be the controversial Howard Sternish show of parking. And so that's the path that we took. And here we are.
Yeah. So. And we went through a few different names too we didn't know what to call it and we didn't know how simplistic to be or how creative. And so there were a lot of different ideas, but I do 100%, I have to call out because I have to give John all the credit here. I am so lucky. Like I usually just show up and we record like that. Our studio is amazing. John's got everything here. Like
it is amazing. I can attest to that.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, we have gotten as far as we've gotten because of John. And so thank you, John. I appreciate it.
You know what? It's a team effort. So.
No, it is. We make a great team. We make great co-hosts. You host together. And so
absolutely. I don't think the show would have the personality it does without you. So I've looked into replacing you. But.
I know.
Of course you did. That's the struggle.
We've had plenty of guests on the show where I'm like, oh, John, this guest is going to replace me. John is going to. We've had Mark Jackson, Joe Lang, you, Brian. Like, I'm shocked that I'm not replaced yet.
Totally kidding. Never even thought.
Yeah. That's such a John Conway thing to say, too, by the way. Trying to throw you off your game. Yeah, I've checked into replacing you.
Yeah.
That's good. Oh, that's so good. Okay. All right. So you're 13 months in. I love the different perspectives. That's hilarious. You're 13 months in, 14 months in, whatever. It's just over a year. What are now that you've got your sea legs about you, no pun intended for you, John, what are your aspirations for your podcast? What do you want to get done? What are you trying to do?
Are you asking me or Dani first?
Either one.
You answer.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I think I'm just trying to bring current events out into the airwaves of parking.
Yeah.
I can remember a time when we were siloed. And this person works in Colorado. And yeah, some people make it to the trade shows and they have the privilege of being able to meet other people from around the country. But I think hopefully we can be an avenue for people to tune in and get some kind of perspective of what's going on industry wide. And I think that's the goal. I think we have plans. We want to evolve a little bit more. I think going to the shows and doing floor interviews is something we want to set up. I think we're looking into getting different equipment. I'm not sold on some of the recommendations that have been made, but that's what we want to do. We want to add some fun and talk to as many gritty parking people as we can.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think there's also one thing we've tried to highlight and really pushed is women in parking, which is our show fully supports. And we've had a number of guests on, and I think it started with Kendra Petty, and we've exposed in our own way some things that still are occurring in our industry. So I definitely think
It's all
that's an
Mike.
important topic, but I think having a guest on that has a lot more expertise in that area. I'm just a sales guy, right? So
Yeah. Uh-oh. I'm seeing Dani reach for power. She running out of power.
Naturally, of course, my computer is going to die in the
oh
middle
my
of our
God.
Oh, that's funny.
While we're waiting for Dani, I think there's I think there's a lot of opportunity I think the shows, I've talked to Kevin a little bit. I think Kevin's got some great ideas. You and
I agree.
about Parking Today and the Pie Show. I think I heard him talk about, I haven't seen or heard anything come to fruition yet, but having a podcast row,
Yep.
I think that's a wonderful idea.
Yeah.
I think that would be great.
People
I
set
agree.
up a studio right there and then grab people for interviews and different things. I think I think it's pretty cool.
Totally agree. Whatever we can do to make the tide rise. Again, here we go again with boats. How did I know that we were going to have so many boat analogies? All right. So Dani, what about you? What are you trying to get done? Anything that you would add to what John said?
I think that one of the big topics that we talked about when we decided to do this is just bringing a different perspective to the industry. It's a lot of like my family and my friends and a lot of like even acquaintances still don't understand what I do. And I think that was something I wanted to bring a different understanding and different perspective to what we do. And when you tell people, oh, I worked in parking, and I'm still working on how to describe exactly what I do, whether it's private development or parking, or I work in technology, I find that people are least interested in when I say I park cars.
Yeah.
And I think
sure.
it's such a wonderful industry, and it's been so good to me, but not just me, but my family, right? I have twin brothers who are younger than I am, and they both work in the industry. And I was lucky enough to be able to bring them in, and they've been in the industry for quite a while now, like myself. And so the industry's been so good to us. I've wanted to expose all the great qualities about our industry, because I think that it is, and I've said this before, I think it's an underdog, and people just hate parking their cars. And whenever I talk to anybody who doesn't know anything about the industry, they're like, oh, like I went downtown and I had to pay $5. And I'm like, oh my God, that's like a discount. What are you
And then I got a parking.
Yeah, what is that? I need to go park there. And so it was just really, I wanted to bring light and a different perspective and an understanding maybe to those outside the industry, right? I wanted to also speak to people inside the industry, but I think my entire vision for it was just like me getting into parking. And I've said this multiple times before, is that I got into the industry because I wanted to help change the minds of the consumer, of the customer, of the guest visiting any parking asset. If I could help them park their car and make that flow a little bit easier, like I know that I'm making a difference. So my thought behind doing this is I really wanted to make a difference, and I really wanted to give our industry a voice, of just a different voice of who we are and what we do, because we are an amazing industry, and there are so many incredible people in this industry. And so that was my intentions behind wanting to get behind the podcast.
Yeah. You've touched on something that's near and dear to my heart, and was something that I'm trying to do too. So Mark Jackson, the fact that you interviewed Mark Jackson, I think will go a long way towards creating what I'm trying to do is crossover. I want non-parking people to listen to a parking podcast. And if we can get Mark Jacksons in the world, that's the whole thrust behind segment 2 is I'm talking to people. So Kyle Lacy is the chief marketing officer of Jellyfish. He is attempting to get people to pay attention to whatever company he's trying to help do marketing to. It's a hard job. It's harder than it looks. And so I'm hoping that by blending parking with non-parking people, we can help parking people appreciate that there are other jobs that are harder than it looks. But we can also then try and draw some non-parking people into the podcast so that they can hear the fact that parking is really hard. It's hard, and it takes hard work. It's thankless work. And we're just trying to get the word out that we're humans too. We're people too.
Take it easy on us. Give us a little grace here.
Yeah. Listen, we have a job to do too, right? And oh, by the way, the better we do our job, the faster you get into your spot and get on to where you're going. That is one of the most important parts.
And Dani, what is it? The best parking experience is the one
That's
never
remembered.
That nobody remembers. Yeah. It's like being on an airplane. It's like going home and flipping the switch and the lights come on. It's all those things.
Everything's falling into place, right? You just
It's
want
all
it
those
to
thankless
fall in
jobs.
place.
Yep. No
I
question.
think one of the things, at least from my perspective, I don't know about Dani, but I think one of the things with Mark Jackson, what we were trying to accomplish is to show, because again, my heart is watching people work hard and build something.
Yeah.
And achieving something. And it may not be a business. Maybe it's you've achieved a high level, a CEO or whatever your goal.
Yeah. Getting to the NFL. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
My goal there was to show that it doesn't matter what you're doing. Everything's hard work, right?
Yeah.
Getting to the NFL was hard work for him. Getting to where you want to be in parking is hard work. And so we tried to take away and highlight some of the things, self-doubt, some of the things that were challenges for him. When you go back and if you listen to that show, which I would encourage for some people, there's a lot of those things that he highlights that he had that apply to our stories as well. How many times I've had self-doubt that you've almost walked away from something. And as fascinating as it is, we got a couple stories out of him that he's never told.
Yes.
I was shocked to know that he quit training camp in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
After going to a Super Bowl and catching a pass,
One of the things, I think I love most too about, sorry to go, we're going a little off track here, but.
No, we're right on track. Keep going. This is interesting.
That I love most about our industry, because it's parking, mobility, transportation, is that you can have a master's, you can have a PhD, you could have no degree, there's no discrimination, right? It depends on how hard you work. If you work hard and you want to learn from the bottom up, you could have no degree and you could be the CEO, you could be the CEO of a company any day. I love that about our industry. It's like the more gritty that you are, the more that you're willing to learn and
use the word.
do the right?
I think you should patent that word.
And you do the hard things, right? Like there's nothing that, and I say this time and time again, like there's nothing that I would ever ask my team to do that I wouldn't do.
I think there's a message to be, I think there's a message to be sent to the young people, and this is no criticism, but I think needs to be a message. When I was coming up early in my working years and working days, I always heard the terms roll up your sleeves, right? And the person that's willing to roll up your sleeves, no matter what you're doing, right? You could be the CEO or you could be the CO, roll up your sleeves and get in the trenches. And that's what I loved about parking all these years was, getting in the trenches and seeing it for yourself. And that's what really brings it home. Bring anything you're doing. It's like when you're down in the trenches and you can see things yourself, it gives you the perspective of what reality is versus what's being reported to you, right?
Yeah.
Not a king's rule, but something else. I mean, a king used to sit in his chair with wine and they'd come up and report to him, but he has no clue. He only knows what's being reported.
The opportunity for growth in our industry, I think, is endless. And that's for anybody. You don't have to start at a manager level or director level or a C-suite level. Like the opportunity for growth in our industry is there. It's endless. And I love that. It gives everyone and anyone the opportunity to grow and get outside their comfort zone as long as you're willing to do so.
Yeah. So I'm going to touch on a couple of different things. I'm going to tug on my ear, a couple of different things, Mary Tyler Moore style. So of course, gritty. Listen, if you're in parking, you've got to love just a little bit of pain. But the thing I think that when you're interviewing people, when you're looking for parking people, they have to be able to tell you a story about above and beyond, about giving it all, about not willing to sacrifice, those kinds of things. Because John, when I hear you talking about the things that you did, the things that are important to you, and the way that you got up and the humility, Mark Jackson's humility and the fact that he quit and then he came back, you've got to hear those kinds of stories from parking people to know that they're going to be successful. Because I can tell you that we have folks in our call center that can tell you story after story about the really difficult calls that they took, but they show up the next day because they've got that parking grittiness, right? They are okay with people being upset because they know they're not mad at them. They're just mad, but they've got the personality and the mindset and the ability to give me more. Think about give me more, right? Because those cars are showing up whether you're ready or not. And those people want to park and they think they're entitled to parking. And you, thank you, sir. May I have another is the rule of the day.
I think we have similar employees. I have a room next door filled with call center people, and geez, the stuff and the abuse.
Oh, I can imagine.
And they show up every day, they do their work, and I've done appeals years ago.
Yeah.
Throughout my career, it's a tough job, and it can bring you down if you let it. And I think a lot of those professionals over there they put their game face on and they view it as a job, and then they leave at the end of the day and they don't let it get them down. So that's a professional.
Mm-hmm.
They just bring it. And Dani, for you to do the level of parking that Oakview Group does with what I'll call, at least from the outside, the view I have is the skeleton crew that you have is mind-boggling, actually. I understand why you go coast to coast and Joe Lang's in South America and then he's in Europe and then he's wherever he is. You want to talk about people that bring it. The Oakview Group folks bring it.
I can see it from just my vantage point, that the way these people travel. I was in the airport division at one point in my career, which was a lot of travel, but these people, I don't even know what the definition of their travel is.
And it's funny because I think growing up, I always was like, oh, I can't wait. I just want a job that's going to let me travel the world and see the beautiful places. And I am living my I manifest that, right? I am living in that fully because I'm on the road probably 3 weeks out of the month, if not the entire month, just popping around. And you're right. Like we were a skeleton crew for a really long time and we've grown incredibly fast in the last, I would just say, 6 to 8 months. And so we've doubled our numbers, which we're very grateful, but that doesn't mean that we stop. That just means that we're moving faster than ever. And we are sprinting, honestly.
I can tell a recent story. Joe Lang's wife works for us, does a great job. And I was like, oh, what are you guys doing this weekend? And she's, Joe and the whole crew, they're all separated at different venues and they're working through the whole 4th of July weekend. It's wow.
Yep.
And that's just normal for those
normal.
So.
And this is one of the things that I think that I don't struggle with because we've all made sacrifices, right? John, you've made plenty of sacrifices to get to where you are, to get your business to where you are. Your business, this is incredible. You have built something, but not without sacrificing a lot, right? And in my personal journey, I've sacrificed a lot as well. I don't have, my time management is really poor, but I also am still trying to figure out how to balance a personal and a professional life. And I've grown my career in such a short amount of time, really fast. I've risen from a manager level to a senior director position now. And in a very short amount of time, and I'm very lucky, but that didn't come without sacrifices, right? Like I sacrificed a lot of family time. I sacrificed a lot of holidays. A lot of people may or may not know this, but I was married for 12 years. And a lot of that my career growth took a really big toll, unfortunately, on that part of my life. And I sacrificed my home time with my 14-year-old dog. But at the end of the day, it's still the sacrifices that I make, I still align with my mission and my values and my entire mission the reason why I joined this industry and the reason why I made the jump to come to Oakview Group, because the values and the mission of just Oakview Group as a whole really align with who I am as a person. And I see that mission. I want to see that mission through and through with Joe, with Ryan, with Matt, with my entire team. And it's really about creating unforgettable experiences for we really care about everybody else, right? Like that we're like everybody in this industry. It's not just me. It's not just Joe, it's not just Oakview Group, but everyone in this industry really cares so much about other people that they're sacrificing a lot of their personal life, right?
Yeah,
to ensure that everybody going to an event or going downtown to park for a Rockies game or go to a restaurant or whatever, like that we're creating such a memorable experience for them that like we show up every single day regardless of what happened the day before that or what's going to happen next or how we're going to be treated. And so it didn't take, but it's taken a lot of work and commitment and sacrifice to get to where I am, and I'm not done, so I'm still here.
You're not done.
I think it is worth mentioning. I will reference the Mark Jackson podcast where I mentioned it, and he added a third rail, which I just thought was, there's a rail theory that I have. He calls it something different, but you got your professional rail. I equate it to a train rolling down the tracks. You gotta have both rails to go, a professional rail and a personal rail. And somewhere along the lines in my career as well, I went through a divorce after 8 years, and the personal rail was pretty much destroyed. It was very, and so you focus on that one rail that you can. And I think we're all trying to find that happiness where there's both rails.
Just a happy medium.
And it's hard.
It's balance. Yeah.
You got to pull back to the other way and say, am I working too hard?
Yeah.
Got to be a balance so you can keep that two rail. And then as Mark added, there's a third rail, and maybe that's the electricity that runs the electric train, right? But it's your health, right? Which he separated that out, and I would have categorized it as a personal rail, but honestly, health could be a rail in all itself. So somewhere along the lines between the two rails,
health is your wealth, right? Like I'm very disciplined in a sense where I make sure, like I know that I can't show up for my job. I can't show up for the people around me if I'm not healthy, if I'm not feeling good. And so I make it a point every single morning, every day at least. I make it a point to.
Yeah. So I only drink 15 beers now.
Normal 40.
Mark's got me focused. I've actually
small
reduced.
Small changes,
small sacrifice. We all make sacrifices.
No, hey, sacrifices. Talking about sacrifices.
Okay, so we are going to transition now. What I love about your introduction is I have John ringing in my ears. We're going to dive into controversy. Okay, so I want to pick one of the most controversial topics in parking, and I want to pick it apart. So what do you think it is? What is causing the most controversy right now in parking?
I think this is a great question.
That's
I think
all you for.
I'm
first.
interested in your perspective as well.
I know what John's going to say, by the way.
One, actually, like when we're not in studio, we call each other like maybe once a week just to catch up. And I think on our last conversation, I don't remember exactly how it unfolded, but I mentioned something about EV, right? Oh, because I said we need to talk about like the next guest that not the next guest, but a guest that I want to bring in. Like I want EV. I want this to be a topic of conversation. And I think it's a very controversial conversation and topic because the industry is divided, I think, about this topic. And to give you a perfect example, like when I was talking to John about this, John was like, that just sounds so boring. But so important. And I think
it's so smart city. If I hear that one more time, I'm thinking.
But I think it's so to me, I think it's such an important conversation.
Yeah. Talking about controversial. Missing a lot of people.
But this is what I'm saying. It's like an industry divided, right? Like this one topic, that and data sharing, I think are the two controversial. Most of the controversial topics in our industry right now that really have the industry divided, and the industry doesn't really know what to think. So I personally think that's a hot topic, and it's a very controversial topic. And I want to dive into it more.
Yeah, so you can't have let's take, from my perspective, let's take smart city. What does that mean, right? So you can't have a smart city if you're not willing to share data.
You can't have a smart city if you're not smart.
That's number one. There's going to be no smart. It's going to be a dumb city if you don't share data.
So are you saying that this is a controversial topic? Are you tying EV and smart cities together?
I'm tying it all in because it's the buzzword, right? The smart city. And I just think it's walk the walk, right? And this is just clearly my opinion. I'm just going to throw it out there. So if you want a smart city, share data. That's number one. But number two, what does this smart city look like? Bikes, transportation, sharing data, credentialing, no gates. What does it look like? License plates. How are we dynamic pricing? Tell me how that works.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I think
how are you going to do dynamic pricing with the regulators the way they are today?
Yeah.
you pull into a parking lot and I hear this, oh, dynamic parking or pricing. It's okay. So I pull in, I pay $20. You come right behind me
And I pay 15.
and you pay 25 or 15.
Yeah.
That's the regulators aren't catching up to that technology. They're going to be like, oh, you charged her different. And now
Well, I think
obviously
that
it all goes back
we're
to
like
signs.
we
but
have to be way far off from smart cities, right? Like I know that there's a smart city just right outside of Denver between Denver International Airport and Denver.
Is it Aurora?
Yeah, no, I think it's I forget what it's called. I'll shoot you the link.
Yeah.
a
Brian.
dumb city that
But-
calls itself
Dumb city.
smart.
we're far off from that, because if you go anyone in operations nowadays and you're taking over especially municipalities, like people
Yeah.
don't want to give their information. You can't
Yeah.
call yourself a smart city if people aren't willing to give you the information, regardless of if we have it already or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, which
Yeah,
is
so
another fight.
I'll shut up after this, but here's if you want to be,
I knew I could get you guys going. This is great.
There you go.
if you want to be a smart city, then start collaborating and stop thinking about how much money you're going to make on the trade show and go there and do the same old thing over and over and tap into the same mindset over and over.
But-
Like there's going to be no smart city unless everybody collaborates, which means,
Yeah.
what does that look like? Maybe there's a lobbyist. Maybe BOMA has a great governmental affairs piece, Building Owners and Managers Association, that represents its constituents. So when we do have regulators and you do want to do smart pricing or whatever.
And I think that it's a good point to make, that like everyone needs to collaborate, but that's not just within the industry, right? That is the consumer as well. You can't have a smart city if you're not, I don't want to say convincing, but if you're not advocating enough for the reasons why we should have smart cities and we should have these certain technologies to the people who are essentially going to be utilizing the assets. And so I think that's where we need to do a better job as an industry, is if that's the way that we want to move, we need to do a better job of explaining the reasons why to the people who are actually going to be parking in our assets and using all of this technology and solutions, why we need to implement such revolutionary technology.
I think maybe I put too much into the trade show organizations, looking for them to be they're the associations. They're the ones.
But trade shows are
leading.
internal. That is for
And
for us.
I know, but
Yeah.
associations that are
Sorry, Ryan, you
representing.
really opened it.
Yeah, no, I did open a can of worms. It's good.
I'm
So,
gonna go on even further.
okay. All right. Okay. So here's what I will say. I think you both touched on things that I think I'm hearing consistently on the podcast. So first, from a municipality perspective, there are really old policies in place that make it really hard to do a smart city. Okay. And when I think about, John, you would know this better than anybody. I didn't know until I read your bio. Leadership matters, but leadership changes direction. And you're the first mayor you worked for could say, yeah, we're going to absolutely be open and we're going to do it. And then he gets burned and he doesn't get reelected. And the next guy comes in and we are not sharing anything with anybody because my predecessor got his ass kicked. Right.
Right.
So there is that thread of the politicians or the people that are making the laws have a much shorter time horizon. And sometimes it's more, and understandably, they're in self-preservation mode, right? But then you've got to have a mechanism to share data, and then you have to have a willingness to share data. But from my perspective, I think it's the consumers that are going to drive it all. And we have to provide enough value and enough enticement. Let's face it, the iPhone sells how many millions of copies or how many millions of iPhones today? Because I can put an entire music library in my pocket. I can have 1,000 apps, right? There is so much value in my pocket. I'm going to shell out $1,000. That's the standard that we have to meet when we're talking about providing value to the consumer, because I think the consumer is ultimately going to drive all of this. That's
I
my
agree.
I agree.
Cheers to that.
Yeah, right on. Let's go. Okay. I have a lightning round, but I want to get to one more thing before we get to the lightning round.
Ooh,
And because I want to provide support and wind beneath your wings around supporting women in parking. So I applaud you for kicking off, trying to drive positive energy around women in parking. My question is, how can I be helpful to the cause? Or how can Parker, how can Brian Wolff, how can other parking professionals that are listening to this podcast, how can we be helpful to women being more active and feeling more comfortable in an industry that, let's face it, is a very pale and male population?
Yeah, I think that's that, Brian. I think that you're doing like wonderful, right? Like you have a lot of leaders at Parker Technology are women, right? And I think that's setting it's not industry standard. And so I think right off the bat, like you're doing great. And you have had so many influential women on your podcast as well. And just by giving them the opportunity for their voice to be heard, I think is a really big step in the right direction of where our industry is going. And so I think moving forward, and I know I need to be more active. Like I'm not actually that active in WIP, like women in parking, but I have recently been able to connect just through the podcast and through Oakview Group and with a lot of leading women industry leaders. And so I think that like moving forward, what the industry holds for us, I think we're just getting started. I really do think that we're just getting started, but I think that you've done an incredible job. You have like a lot of, like I said, the leadership on your at Parker Technology are women, and incredible women.
Yeah, I think it's one thing that I think our management team here, 50% of them are women that represent department heads, which I think is very important. I think allowing women to come on a platform like this and like Harder Than It Looks and feel comfortable enough to tell their stories of the things, that's the kind of thing that I think over time, it's like anything, it's consistency will rule out. And I think as we continue to touch on the stories, eventually it rains home and penetrates the majority of the industry and creates awareness. That's the goal. Just recently, the Angela Clark series, she highlighted that when she goes to meetings, they go to shake Greg's hand first and then say, "Oh, who are you?" And, "Oh, I'm the owner and CEO, right? I'm the person that has visions." And hearing those stories, like hopefully somebody who listens to that podcast goes, "Wow," or excuse me, I don't know.
That's all right. You can swear.
Show, but
You can.
Holy, wow. I, what an ass I am. I assumed, and I shouldn't have. And then and maybe that'll correct behavior going forward. That's all we can ask for. And I think it's the least we can do. And I think, again, as we do this, I think it's just over time, hopefully we have an effect.
Yeah. And I think as women, as we rise in this industry that has been historically male dominated, I think just even educating and the crew who has helped build this industry, which was male dominated, just I think is also very important that we have some incredible women rising in the industry, and it's more diverse now than it ever has been.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that. I think there's still work to be done. I might add that I think there's some work to be done around diversity as well. I'm attempting to open doors and provide a platform for Black leaders as well as women and obviously other minorities. There's lots of opportunity for us to be more open-minded, and I want to be at the front of the class when it comes to stuff like that.
And I kudos right behind you.
Okay. All right. Let's transition because, we can go as long as we want, but we're probably not. Have you ever listened to the Acquired podcast?
I don't think I have.
So these two guys, they break down companies and how companies got to certain places. And the Microsoft podcast is 2 podcasts. Each of them are at least 3 hours long. So there's 6 hours of podcasting.
Yeah.
But these guys, I should know their names by now. They are fabulous. Anyway, we are not going to be acquired. We will eventually lose our audience. So I'm going to turn the page. I'm going to get to the lightning round. It's not really a lightning round because I'm given opportunity to answer the questions.
We're ready for it.
But okay, I've got 6 of them. So the first question is, what phrase are you known for? So you hear that phrase uttered down the hall and everybody in the office knows that you originated that phrase. Go ahead. Give it to me.
No, I don't think I don't know if I have a phrase. Like I would have to ask somebody who I work with. I don't know. That's very true. I was actually standing out in the hallway earlier and I heard John over the headphones talking into his microphone. That's exactly what he was saying. I was like,
going up.
I was like, it's time to go. So
let's get going out. Is that what it is?
What's going out?
Oh, what's going on? Got it. Is that you, Conway?
that's it. That's
me.
John.
That's me.
Okay. What? All
Or
right.
when
Let's
you
go.
say, yeah, baby, say it.
Baby.
He did.
Okay.
That's
All right. That's good. So now I'm going to pay attention, Dani, because I bet you have a phrase on the show that you utter all the time and people have already adopted it.
that's good. I don't. Well, I'll
Fucking
circle.
John.
All right.
I do drop the F-bomb way too frequently. And like I had a conversation with my dad where he was like, I think you need to pull back on that. And I was, because he listens to every single one of my, I really enjoy, but you say the F word a lot. I'm like,
I
Yeah.
need to chill out.
so
too.
probably I'm not going to say it because I've gone this entire show without
Yeah.
really dropping a cuss word. So I'm
Good
proud
for
of
you. Dani's dad would be so proud. Shout
Oh,
out
yeah.
to him.
And he's going to have to
All right.
listen to this. He won't believe
Okay.
it until he
Full
listens to it.
disclosure, though, I am from New York, so
Yeah. What do you want for? Yeah.
I couldn't swear in my wife's household because her father was old school Italian and like literally no swearing. And it was a big deal for me. And so my wife went back to my hometown for the first time. It was like, oh my God. Like, I totally understand now. It's where you
I am the
Yeah.
only one in my family, and it's not ladylike. And I understand, I fully understand, but it's not ladylike. But I'm the only one in my family who really has a potty mouth. And even my brothers get offended sometimes. They're like, "Why are you cussing so much? Are you mad?" And I'm like, "No, I could be happy. I could be mad. It could just be a very normal conversation."
Okay.
Anyways, okay. Lightning round.
So we'll just say Dani's phrase is fuck.
There you go. That actually,
That's probably not very family friendly, but I'm going to listen for it next time.
yeah, it's very, very.
Okay. So next question is, what's the hardest thing you've ever done? Not in parking. We'll get to that later. What's the hardest thing you've ever done in life?
It's a deep question, Brian.
Yeah, it really is. I'm trying to get deep here.
I think that, and I actually randomly thought about this morning, but like the last 3 years have been incredibly hard, right? Like I went through a divorce. My dad beat cancer, and like within a
great.
year of each other, like my dad went through cancer and then I went through a divorce, a 12-year marriage actually. And I really do think that that year was like the hardest year of my life, where I was so incredibly fortunate to be working for a company that supported me through all of that. And my dad had some aggressive cancer where he had to go to chemo 5 days a week for 7 weeks straight. And
Wow.
And so like I went back and I went back and helped support my mom and my dad, and took my dad to not chemo, I'm sorry, radiation. He had to go through radiation 5 days a week. And so yeah, that, and then when it was hard, but I think that's probably the hardest thing that I've ever been through. But I am thankful for the industry because the company that I was at the time really supported me and my entire family through that journey. And one of the reasons why I am still to the industry, because like I said, there are incredible people here, and I'm thankful and grateful for that experience, unfortunately. And yeah, hard, but we're all okay. We all came out on top.
Yeah. Good for you. All right, John.
So I would say the obvious answer, which isn't the answer for me, but it would be my divorce. I think I was a single dad, so I had my daughter and I had a great support mechanism. It was a hard experience to go through, no doubt. And if I hadn't sold to private equity, the company, that would probably be at the top of the list. But I think that transaction that I went through 2 years ago was without a doubt that was the most difficult thing I've ever gone through. Ups, downs, emotional, physical. It was physical, right? And geez, I have to say, without a doubt, that was the hardest thing I've ever done. So.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. I've heard that's hard. All right. So then now, what's the hardest thing to do in your parking job today?
Try to make my flight.
Yeah. Be there.
Try to make my flight on time. No, it's like in parking, it's really, I fly a lot. So I'm at the airport. I live at the airport more than I live in my condo. But I think I think that's why I don't have a good balance between my personal and my professional life, because I put everything towards my professional life.
Yeah.
So I'm really well put together in a sense in my professional life. But yeah, it's not easy juggling the two. So I really try to make sure that I'm put together. It's hard for me to be so disciplined in my professional life, right? There are a lot of things that go into my week, into my day, where I have to be self-disciplined in order to make sure that I'm performing to my ability for my job. and my
OPU
role.
standards.
Yep,
Yeah,
absolutely.
for sure.
I would say right now is there's a couple things. Obtaining the budget that we did for the year from a growth standpoint.
Yeah.
And as part of that, I think I would say part two is PRS is at I think a point of its existence that we've outgrown our logo and our marketing material. It doesn't really fit, and it doesn't really disseminate the message or communicate the message of what we actually do these days. I still think we're referred to or thought of as the parking ticket company, and that's really not us anymore. Yeah, it's our core business, but there's so much more that we're doing in growing and trying to keep that message out and is a challenge right now. And obviously we've just engaged one of the worldwide marketing firms, and excitingly, you'll see in the next couple months, not to plug, but you'll see a reintroduction of who PRS really is. So,
Nice.
yeah.
I would say that marketing and sales are hard things to do in parking. It's hard to be consistent. And so hats off to you.
Yeah,
Get ready to
summer
go.
months are tough too.
Yeah.
It's hard to pin people down.
Yes, it is. Okay. Next question is, if you could wave a magic wand and fix anything in parking, what would it be?
Consumer understanding.
Yeah. Okay. I get that a lot.
I think that's just basic understanding. These are really great questions,
they are.
Brian.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I didn't mean to stump you. All right. So come on, John, if you could wave a magic wand, I've got one for you if you don't have it.
No, I got one. I think Dani hit the nail on the head, but I would take it a step further. Just an overall understanding of parking and what is behind parking, right?
Who we are and what we do.
So
Yeah.
I would say the perception of parking, if I could wave a magic wand, I'd change the perception.
Yeah. Me too. That's a good one. Okay. So when you're not parking cars, what do you do for fun? Do you have any time for fun, Dani?
Oh, I was going to say, I was like, on Saturday, Sundays, I'm usually out parking cars myself. I love to travel. Oh, I like Joe. It's funny because Joe's, you're the only person I know who travels to take a break from traveling. So yeah, so
Interesting.
I do. I travel when I can. I travel the world. Like I just got back from 13 days in Europe, and I took my work with me, so I didn't completely take off. But if I can work from anywhere, it's a great thing. When I don't have to be on site at a venue, I can work from anywhere. And so I decided to work for a few days in Europe. So when I'm not
Sweet.
when I'm not in the parking lots, I'm traveling.
Traveling the world.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. John, what are you doing?
Number one is spend as much time as I can with our grandchildren who live right next door to us. Conveniently, we get to spend a lot of time. And then right up there is golf. Every now and then I find some time to hit a few balls around. And it's just nice being outside and enjoying that camaraderie with the other three people that you happen to be golfing with. So
Do you have a handicap, John?
I don't recall.
Okay, I'll leave it at that.
John doesn't golf without beer. So
I was going to say, no, I'll leave it at that until there's money on the line. And then I'm going to make him declare. Okay.
yeah.
Okay. All right. So last question for you. What are you most proud of? You can say your family. If you say your family, if you've got obviously John with grandkids, that's a game changer, I've heard. So you could say that, and then I need something else. So family always counts, but then I need a second one.
In the industry or just generally?
I think personally, what are you most proud of? I'm trying to get inside your mind.
I think this it's an easy, but it's a really hard question.
I know.
Yeah, right?
So Brian. These are great questions.
Damn you, Brian.
I'm sorry.
My streak of not being able to cuss. I think at the moment, not going back, but like those 3 years that I talked about previously on that one specific year, I think, and I don't want to toot my own horn by any means, but it's hard when you can build yourself up and wake up every single day to do something because you have a bigger vision and you have a bigger mission for yourself. I think that is what I'm most proud of, right? Is that I could have let all these things completely tear me down and take me down, and I would not be where I am today if I didn't decide to wake up every single day and do the hard thing.
John, what about you?
I think, of course, family and having to look at my grandchildren every day and being able to take Kinsley to her first day of kindergarten 2 days ago was amazing. My wife and I walking her, the school is in the neighborhood. That's number one. But
Awesome.
honestly, number two, to answer, because obviously family, you want something else. Being able to look back on my career and the relationships that I've established. It's not just work anymore. I have friends that would be there for me, whether they work for me, whether they used to work for me, and have some really cool friendships that I've developed in the last 28 years of people that I know if I needed would be there regardless. And I think that's special, and all the things that you might look at in a career, I think that's number one in accomplishment. Forget all the monetary and the businesses and all that. It's the relationships.
Yeah. Those are good ones. Those are great ones. Okay. All right. I'm out of hard questions. I think what's that?
So you really put us through it there.
Yeah. I'd like to make you think. And then I'm digging deep. I want to know
Right.
what's really happening. So that's good. So I appreciate that. I think this will be the best episode ever. And then we're gonna get to crossover. We're gonna get to crossover heaven. Hopefully people will pop over and listen to all things parking.
Right.
And they'll come back to Harder Than It Looks. And then we'll wrap Isaiah Mao into that mix and get Kevin Uhlnacher and get us into Podcast Row. And ultimately, I think we're all trying to do the same thing. We're trying to lift parking.
I agree.
We're trying to support parking. We're trying to get the general public to understand that the jobs that we have are hard, and that the people that work for parking are hardworking people that they can certainly relate to. So
I think it's great because I think each podcast has its own personality. And
Yeah.
I think we can not only hit different audiences, but I think we have crossover as
Yep.
well. There's people that enjoy this a particular time of week. Maybe ours is Friday afternoon before happy hour, and maybe somebody else's is different. So I think there's, like you said, there's a message across the podcast. And I think the sooner the industry embraces the audio media that we have now in parking, the better. And I think Kevin's on his way to doing that.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks, Brian.
That's a wrap for segment 1. We're going to take a break to tell you all about our exciting user conference, Fusion 25, coming in May next year. And then stick around. You're not going to want to miss hearing from my next guest, who will tell us all about something else that's harder than it looks, but not in parking. Stay tuned. Hey, Parker customers, want to connect, learn, and advance with the best in the parking industry? Then mark your calendars for Fusion 25, our exclusive user conference happening from May 27th to May 30th in 2025, right here in Indianapolis. Fusion 25 will be 2 days filled with sessions tailored to your partnership with Parker Technology, engaging workshops, networking, and exclusive access to new products and features. You'll also enjoy events and happy hours from some of our favorite spots right here in Indy. You'll leave the conference with a roadmap to make the most of our partnership, new connections with other Parker Technology clients, and fresh ideas to enhance your operations and customer experience. Don't miss out on Parker's inaugural user conference. Early bird registration opens on October 1st, but for now, you can visit parkertechnology.com/fusion25 to save the date. We'll see you in May 2025.
Welcome back to segment 2 of Harder Than It Looks. For those of you who do not know me, obviously I'm not Brian. My name is Heidi Barber, and I am Parker's VP of Marketing and actually one of the originators of this podcast. Super excited today to introduce our guest for segment 2, Kyle Lacy, the current CMO at Jellyfish. Kyle spent the last 17 years building, scaling, failing, and winning in high-growth software. Before joining the Jellyfish Bloom, he had the pleasure of building a company called Lessonly. They've employed over 230 people and changed the lives of many more after the acquisition. Kyle's also been fortunate to lead teams at Seismic, OpenView, Salesforce, and ExactTarget. However, most importantly, Kyle's the father of 2 wonderful boys, an energetic dog, and one too many books on World War II. I personally know Kyle as an Indianapolis legend and pavilion guru, known for his leadership and innovation in marketing and specifically B2B SaaS. I've been a huge fan for a while. Kyle, welcome to Harder Than It Looks.
Thank you for having me. It's always weird hearing bios read back to you. And I want to apologize to our new cat that I did not include. Name is Bootsy. Bootsy, if you're listening, I am sorry.
It's great to have you on, Kyle. Thanks again for being here. As I mentioned in your intro, so you are fairly well known here in Indy, but we have a lot of listeners in the parking industry that are from the US and Canada. So would love if you could share a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. Long story short, I started my career starting an agency, design and branding agency out of college. And that led to my first software job, which was at a company called ExactTarget, which many people who are listening from the Indianapolis area probably know. And that's where I fell in love with building teams and driving marketing for software companies. And so that led me to work at a VC firm in Boston. It also led me to a company called Lessonly, which you mentioned, which was based in Indianapolis, which we grew and sold. And then I've been in leadership positions from leading teams of 20 to leading teams of 90, and currently at Jellyfish, where I have a team of 15 and it's about 250 people based in Boston. So a lot of my time and energy is spent, how do you build marketing teams that help companies scale, both creatively and on the revenue side as well.
When you first started, was there a specific area in marketing that you really got adept at? I know a lot of times as marketers, we start in one area and move our way up.
Yeah, I mean, I taught myself graphic design in college. And so whether or not I was good or not, you could ask people I worked with a long time ago. I wasn't that great at it, but it did give me more of a creative and brand element to what I do. And that's still what I enjoy. I've worked on pipeline and bookings numbers for a long time because that's what drives business, but also brand is important in building movements and understanding the consumer. And I think brand and creativity is where I started and where I still get a lot of my joy on a daily basis.
Yeah, I totally get that. That actually leads me to then, I'm curious how you, as CMO, I've heard before that there can be the school of thought that either you're really great at brand or you're really great at demand and not at both, which obviously is not true. You have to be great at both. So how do you juggle both in your role?
I don't think it matters where you get joy as a marketing leader or as a leader, especially in software companies. And I think that it matters what drives growth and bookings and revenue. And so we all know that brand does, and it does matter, but I think that it's very much dependent on how you understand what drives revenue. And as a marketer, you can't just spend all your time thinking about creative work because you can wax poetic all day long in a board meeting or a leadership meeting about this beautiful ad you designed or the direct mail or some booth. And if the sales team misses their number, who cares?
Yep.
Who cares? Bookings are everything. Revenue's everything. So that's why we are in business. We're not in business not to grow. So you got to be able to balance both. And if you don't balance both appropriately, you're going to see the door sooner than you would like.
Yep. I totally resonate with that. And I remember you saying that, I think it was in CMO school. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah.
CMO school. Okay. When you had, I think, a few sessions that you did, and one of your hot tips is throw leads out the window. It needs to be revenue that marketing is tied to and being measured on. And it's funny because that's literally the drum I've been beating, and Brian totally gets that. But when I first started, it was like, it's all about leads and demand creation. And I was like, Brian.
I think it's important to know that you need leading and lagging indicators no matter what. The problem is a lot of marketing teams, whether it's for your listeners or for a software company, they tend to just talk about leading indicators. How much leads did we produce? How much marketing qualified leads? How many people raised their hand for a sales call? And the reality is you need both, because if you have a bunch of people raise their hand for the sales call and sales doesn't hit their number, then you got a problem. I think throwing leads out the window might be a little bit over the top, which I probably was being over the top at the time, but I do think you can't just solely talk about lead gen, because marketing should be involved in 100% of the customer journey, no matter what, prospect to customer, because we care deeply about the experience that people are having, because that's what great marketers do.
It's like you saw my script, because that was literally where I was headed next, was your customer marketing force. Because that's totally a misconception. It's something I've had to break down in my own org around marketing is touching the full customer journey, like you said. Even some of our metrics are really measured on for new logo acquisition. But as we know, if you look at the bow tie model or whatever framework you want to talk about, marketing is definitely part of that retention piece too. So could you speak to that a little bit more and just your thoughts around customer marketing and why it's so important?
Yeah. And this applies to any business.
Mhm.
Just because I've been in software for 15 years doesn't mean the same frameworks don't apply to running a B2C company or or a traditional B2B, or a channel business or whatever. You can put it under any context. You can wax poetic about how it's more expensive to get a new customer than a current one. We've talked about that for years.
Mhm.
I do think that, especially in software, there's a certain point in time in growth where the expansion of the customer is more important to the growth of the company than net new acquisition. And it's dependent on the company. It's different for everyone. But there's a certain point in time where marketing has to be thinking about net new pipeline generated, net new customers, and expansion at the same time. And I can't produce a framework that says right at this point, you need to be thinking about that. But your net revenue retention has to be above 110%, if not more than that, for you to have a viable growth after a certain point.
Yep.
And I think marketing, a lot of times it's thrown off to account management team or the account executive to grow, or the customer success team or whoever. I think the marketing should be involved because it helps build more of a process that aligns everyone than just, hey, CS rep, you need to go sell more of X. But it's different for every company.
Yeah. So in your background, the context that you shared with me, you shared that you grew a company, I'm assuming Lessonly, from 30 million to selling it for 300 million. So what would you say were the top drivers of success for that, for you as the CMO?
Wow. Good question.
I know.
I think that top drivers of success. I think we spent an inordinate amount of time figuring out how to connect the internal values of the company to our external brand. And that meant a lot. It showed a human element to a company that I don't think a lot of B2B brands figure out in their lifetimes, especially software. So that's number one. Number two is we had a robust inbound engine. Inbound was between 60 to 75% of pipeline and bookings from the very beginning. So it was high velocity. It became more cumbersome when we moved up market because the deals are more complex. But for Lessonly, we had a strong inbound motion. We understood how to build a more human brand that worked because what we were selling was more personal development, sales readiness. How do you train people to do their jobs better? How do you get them to do better work, which was our mission statement. I think those are the two main things. And because we spend so much time and energy on the brand and the values, the team could be more creative around certain things that I don't think people don't think that outside the box a lot of times. And we were just really good at connecting creativity with good taste with our values, and it worked.
I think anybody who is from Indy and knows of Lessonly knows the llama, right? From a brand identity standpoint, that is pretty iconic.
You see this in service companies. There's a local HVAC company in Indy who has spent a lot of time and energy building meaningful values that connect to their business and treat their employees that's similar to other software companies. So I think there's a lot that can be learned there when it comes to how do you build a high performing business where EQ is high and your values make sense. What Lessonly, Max and Connor were the co-founders of Lessonly. What they did was they created values at the very beginning that could be said, like share before ready, have difficult conversations. That was what was different. Half the values that we use at Lessonly, I use at Jellyfish. Jellyfish has its own values, which are really important, but they were so meaningful to everyday work that you could use it in any context. It wasn't like, I don't know, think of a stupid value, like drive. Now I can't even think of one. Be
No.
aggressive. Oh no, like
Oh, that's
you
okay.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like where you couldn't, there isn't any difference between the accounting firm that has it and the
Right.
HVAC firm that has it, because they weren't creative at all in trying
Mm.
to bring it. So there's a lot to be said there. And it built a brand that got a 10x on revenue outcome.
Yep.
And the brand was a huge part of that.
No, that's good. It makes perfect sense. Is my internet okay, Courtney? We're going to need to pause here because it keeps glitching for me. And I don't know if I need to switch to my hotspot or something. I did this last time we recorded on Riverside too. So in that session that I mentioned earlier about customer marketing, I loved your slides on hot tips. I was like, oh my gosh, that's so fun. So I am curious what your hot tip is around sales and marketing alignment. I know this is the buzzword all the time that everyone's talking about, but I'm curious. You've experienced it quite a bit. So where have you seen it work exceptionally well? And I'd be curious if there are certain characteristics that are prevailing across those experiences that contributed to that.
There is one rule of thumb to drive alignment across. I don't care what business you're in. You own the same number. That's it. If you want to drive alignment between marketing, sales, and customer success and customer support and whoever is in that, let's drive bookings and revenue growth for a company, you all are looking at the same number. Now, marketing might have different leading indicators, but the lagging indicators are all the same. Marketing can't be celebrating a bunch of leads and marketing qualified and events that a bunch of people showed up to, and sales is at 50% capacity. It doesn't work. And that's where misalignment happens. And a lot of times people don't spend the time and energy to work through, to have the difficult conversation around what the number is and own it with finance or the
Yeah.
CEO or whoever's setting the number. Because you can't create a pipeline model, you can't create marketing goals without understanding sales capacity, because your reps are the one, especially if you're sales led, which a lot of businesses are, your reps are the one closing the deals. Who cares what you did on the marketing side if you're missing your revenue number?
So how does attribution play into that for you and your perspective then? And is that like a key part? Candidly, that's part of how we get to our number is by looking at attribution.
Mhm.
And sometimes there can be a rub around, okay, did marketing source it or did sales go prospect it or what have you? So I'm curious what your thoughts are with that.
Owning a number together also means that you agree to disagree on how it's tracked. I don't care what model you use, as long as it's documented and people sign off on it. So for us, we have multiple models. We have a direct source attribution model with a 90-day look back, and we have a multi-touch attribution model for larger deals.
Yeah.
And we look at both. And when there is disagreements with the sourcing information, whether that was a BDR or Google Ads or whatever the direct, then you go back to what was agreed on the definition and say, does it fit the criteria? Do we need to arbitrate it? But what people do is that they just set the number and then they go argue about it when they didn't agree on the definition at the beginning. And that's about owning a number together. It's not just setting the monetary value. It's about understanding how you're measuring that number from a leading to lagging indicator. Because if you have that, doc, then it's so much easier, because it's like, no marketing, you sourced this 180 days ago and the BDR was a different contact and they sourced it via a cold call. No, you
Yep.
don't get credit for that because it was a different context, right? That's where, and then again, depending on who's listening, that's when you start debating on account-based or contact-based, depending on how many contacts are involved in an opportunity. And then you get too deep, and this is not a rev.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that is, I feel like that's always, if Brian had a catchphrase for me, it's what about the attribution? Because I'm always asking about, anyway.
You can do direct source, and then you can do self-reported via forms, being landing pages.
Mm-hmm.
When somebody calls the business and asks for details on something, ask them where they heard about it. And then you can look at both data points to try to figure out what's working and what's not.
No, that's good. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, as I was doing a little research, I did see you've written 3 books. So super curious, especially about the For Dummies books. How do you become an author of a For Dummies book?
Just to preface this conversation, all of those are out of date.
Okay.
I'm sure you can find them on eBay, but all of them are out of date. None of them make any sense anymore. So please don't go buy them.
Fair enough.
It's not worth it. So it was actually in Indy, the Dummy series. I don't know if it is anymore. The Dummy series was based in Indy.
I didn't realize that. Oh, wow.
Yeah. And at the time I had my agency. We had shifted to do social media consulting because it was a time when LinkedIn and Facebook and stuff just started building more value with a business owner. I think our first product was MySpace pages for churches, and we sold 0 of the product. But anyway, it led to boot camps. So I was doing social media boot camps, 8-week boot camps. And somebody that was in the boot camp was a next door neighbor to one of the editors at Wiley. And over the weekend, they were complaining. The editor at Wiley was complaining about how they couldn't find a writer for Twitter marketing for dummies. And that's how my name came up. And that's how I got the book deal.
Wow.
Once you get one, it led to, we wrote Branding Yourself, which is still in print. I think it's going into its 5th edition through Pearson. And then the social CRM book I wrote was a bad idea that sold like 10 copies. So the Branding Yourself one actually continues to sell. Yep. There's some university out in Seoul, South Korea that keeps buying them. I don't know why, but every year, constantly, every semester, they're buying more. So once you get one, it's fairly easy to get others.
Sounds like an excuse to go to Korea. College session.
Depending on who it is, it could just, we don't know, but we'll see.
Okay. Personal branding. That's something I've talked quite a bit about in my industry. I think it is valuable. I mean, in fact, in my company, I've seen it be super successful just for the overall company brand too. We're small enough and in an industry that's niche enough that personal brand is super important because we're so relationship driven, and it's big, but it's small. And so curious, I don't know if you had a few hot tips to give the listeners around personal branding.
Personal branding can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. I think the most important thing is for you to spend time and energy trying to figure out how to tell your story in a meaningful way. So it doesn't matter what industry you're in. It doesn't matter if you're a CEO or a head of marketing or an investor or you're retired. You have a unique story. A lot of times people don't spend time trying to figure out how to tell that in a unique way. And I probably didn't do it justice at the beginning of this podcast on telling mine, but if you think through inflections that you had in your career, nobody can tell the book story about how I was doing a boot camp and met the next door neighbor that was an editor at Wiley. Nobody can tell the story about how we sold Lessonly and I went and I joined the seismic leadership team. And that's a whole nother thing that I can talk about that was a very different experience for me. And I call them inflection points because it's what makes you different from everybody else. And then I don't care where you tell that story. You could go to networking events and shake hands in person and have a strong network of 50 people and have a strong personal brand with them that drives your business. Fine. Or you can do what I do, which is spend quite a bit of time online and build a much larger. So there's niche personal branding. Like I have a friend who runs a concrete cutting business. He cares very deeply about his personal brand and the brand of the company to everybody he sells to. He does not care what everybody else thinks outside of that network.
So right? Who's your friend? I used to work in concrete.
ABC Concrete Cutting.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. I don't know your friend, but I know of them.
So you have the niche network, but you also have a more expansive one, which is where I spend my time, which is trying to reach as many people as possible in my focus. So I have 2 focuses. I have a marketing / corporate Kyle development, which is peers and recruiters and CEOs and investment firms where I want my personal brand to shine. And then also the prospects of Jellyfish. I also want to reach them. And so you got to think about that in different ways, but I don't really care the medium that you share it. You just need to better understand what you think makes you valuable and tell the story in a unique way.
Yeah, that's great. So speaking of personal branding, I know that soon you'll be starting your own newsletter. So I don't know if you want to talk about that at all and what the inspiration was and what your hope is for it.
Yeah. So just to be clear, email newsletter, not like the
Yes.
Dan Kennedy paper newsletters that
Oh.
made his direct mail famous.
Do people still do that? Okay.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. For sure. For sure. Absolutely. And it probably works better. Who knows? I'm all for direct mail. I'm all for physical. So I think a little bit of context. I turned 40 this year. I'm a father, which you mentioned, and because life is so busy, I found it very difficult to set time aside to learn about things that I care about, continue to learn about things I care about, like AI and marketing, as an example, or the building of the software industry and what's changing there. And then also things that I care about in terms of like parenthood and movies and music. And you mentioned World War II, geopolitical history. And so for me, it's more of a commitment to myself to spend time on a weekly basis reading about that stuff and writing about it. So it's more personal for me. The newsletter is called Mused, MUSED, which is like musings about fatherhood, marketing, books, anything I could possibly think of that is more around an amusing life. And by the time you're listening to this, there'll be a couple released and you could find it. Go and find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. It's more for me to make a commitment to spend the time to read and learn and write more, because I think it's very important, especially as you get older and as life gets hectic. And I'm reading very good copy by our friend Eddie, who founded Very Good Copy, the agency, and it's all about writing. And it just got me pumped up. Got me pumped up to do it.
Good for you. I heard once that if you just write 5 minutes a day, then you like build a habit and can just get better and better from there. I tried it for about 3 days. And then
Well, I think for me, that's why I have to say this out loud and I have to launch something that people sign up for, because then I'm committed. And that's my personality. Anybody who knows me, that's what I have to do. So I hope hopefully people enjoy it.
Awesome. We will include the link in the show notes. Across all of your experiences in marketing tech, are there any commonalities in the challenges that you faced? Because this is harder than it looks. I probably should have prompted that a little sooner. The whole thing with this podcast is that we all have jobs and things that we do that a lot of times are harder than they look. So are there common challenges that you've seen across your marketing tech jobs?
Honestly, I think the most common challenge is personal, which is burnout. It's how do you make sure you're managing the ebbs and flows of a high growth business where you're not driving yourself into the ground. That's the only commonality that I have found. ExactTarget had its own issues. Leslie had its own issues. Salesforce, Seismic, OpenView, Jellyfish, they're all different. There's not a lot of commonality other than your ability to maintain a positive outlook when you deal with things constantly. And for people who aren't in high growth software where you raise money and you try to win a category or a market in a short period of time, it's harder for people to understand that.
Right.
Because the rate that we move, because we have the capital to do it, is 10 times faster than a traditional business. And so I have had to learn, I've burned out multiple times and I've had to learn how to manage that appropriately, where I am not ruining myself every 12 months because I'm spending way too much time trying to figure out how to win constantly. And I think it makes you a better person. It makes you a better partner. It makes you a better human. It makes you better at your job if you manage that appropriately. Be aggressive, but make sure you're taking the time to take a breath and exercise. You really should exercise. Everybody should exercise, but that's the commonality for me, was that if you build a team that burns out, you're going to lose.
Yeah, I resonate with that a lot. We're a scale up. We're not really startup phase, but definitely high growth, moving fast. And as a mom of 3, one of which is only 14 months and keeps me on my toes, I've had to really Put some boundaries in place.
Yeah,
Okay,
and
at 4:00, I go dark until later in the night because she goes to bed at 6:30.
And a lot of that with your team and who you report to is about expectation setting.
Mhm.
It's about, hey, here's what I'm going to accomplish this month. Here's what I'm going to accomplish this quarter. Here's what we're going to accomplish this year. I'm going to work my butt off to hit those goals. And sometimes I might leave it for because I have kids.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean I'm not going to hit my goal. You can question me on my ability to do my job if I'm not hitting the goals that are the expectations that were set previously. And most of the time when burnout happens and people burn out and people are pissed or there's miscommunication on how people are taking time throughout the day to take a break is because there was an expectation set at the beginning.
Yep.
And that's not the employee's fault. It's the manager's fault. It means you have a crappy manager. I don't know if you can cuss on this show. You can edit that. And if you're that manager, set your expectations appropriately. And if the person's taking too much time and not hitting goals, you got a difficult conversation to have, right?
Yep.
But usually the miscues are because there's not expectations set ahead of time.
Yeah. No, great. All right. We are on to the lightning round. So
right.
This is a fun one. I can never think of mine until after the fact. What is a phrase that you are known for? Anyone in your team or in your sphere, if they hear it, they know, oh, that's Kyle.
I had this come up recently. I'm a huge proponent of separating budgeting to 60-70% of your marketing spend should go towards creating bookings and should hit those pipeline and bookings numbers. That way you can spend 30 to 40% on brand that's more creative, more driving, share of voice, all that stuff. And I've been talking about this for a long time. There was a podcast recently that a friend forwarded me where somebody used the phrase, the Kyle Lacy number, which is basically the ratio of how you split your budget. I don't know why it came up. I don't know why they called it the Kyle Lacy number, but they did. And we were laughing about it over text. But if you have the chance, Dave Gerhardt, great marketer, has an awesome marketing community called Exit 5. And it's a great resource for any marketer, even CEOs.
All right. What's the hardest thing you've ever done in life?
The hardest thing I've ever done in life.
I feel like that was like a mic drop, like question.
All right. The hardest thing I've ever done in life is probably a continuing thing, which is be a parent. That is very difficult. It's been very hopefully my kids don't listen to this podcast 10 years from now. It's Caden and Anders. It's been very rewarding being your father, but it's also been very difficult for me. That's definitely the most rewarding and hardest thing I've done.
Yep. I would agree with that wholeheartedly. Okay. So what's the hardest thing about your CMO job?
The speed at which we move and maintaining expectations across the team, across multiple leaders in the C-suite, our board, investors, our customers. That's definitely the hardest part. The market changes so dramatically as you're a scale up, because that's the whole point of a scale up, is that you're trying to win a category. You're trying to win a market before it's in the last innings.
Yep.
And because of that, there are more competitors. They're constantly competitive. Deals become more competitive. You've got to hire more senior people. There is building and challenges that happen in each revenue stage. It's just when you're growing at 60 to 100 to 150 to 200% year over year, which the business changes every 6 months. And that's difficult.
Okay. If you could wave your magic wand and fix one thing in B2B SaaS, what would it be?
Creativity. Be more creative, people. Be a little illogical. Design something that looks different, for God's sake. Be more like a consumer marketer. I'm tired of boring sites. I could talk about that forever. Just take a risk. Be a little different. That's it.
Okay. Great. Right. When you're not scaling and growing companies, what do you do for fun?
Other than like the children aspect, like taking them to practice and playing sports with them and Legos.
I know. This question, I'm always just, I don't know. My life is consumed with family. I don't know.
So, yeah. So if I have time to myself, I'm a huge fan of Orange Theory.
Okay.
Gym.
Nice.
I go 6 times a week.
Wow.
I love Orange Theory. I highly recommend it for anybody that needs somebody to yell at you for you to work out. in a very loving way. They do it in a loving way. It's not like mean. So it's either that or I'm reading. I'm listening to an audiobook or reading, or I love Top Chef show.
Okay.
I will watch I've seen all of them. I've seen pretty much all of them twice. I love everything about that show. Master Chef's okay too, but Top Chef is, if I'm going to watch a show, it's pretty much a cooking show, even though I don't cook and I'm terrible at it.
That was my follow-up question, is if you liked to cook.
I can follow a recipe and I like HelloFresh. I'm not
Okay.
one to go create something.
I feel that. I don't cook either. Last thing, what are you most proud of?
My kids. I think that context there, ever since I graduated college and started a business and fell in love with marketing, it's pretty much been the majority of my self-worth. And getting married and building a family and having children has definitely changed that for me. And I think it's important also to what we talked about before with burnout and driving yourself into the ground. I still have a lot of my self-worth in my career. And I think it makes me better in my job, but I spend more time thinking about how to not raise crazy people and have a little bit more grounded family and children. That's what I'm most proud of right now.
Kyle, thank you again for being on the show.
My pleasure.
Was there anything we missed and should have asked about but didn't?
No, I think everything. I appreciate you having me.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Okay, that's a wrap on this episode of Harder Than It Looks, Parking Uncovered, presented by Parker Technology. Please leave us a review if you liked what you heard. Make sure you tune in next month as we continue to uncover tips, tricks, and best practices to manage what we all know is harder than it looks, parking a car. Bye for now.